You're watching The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the God. We are The Breakfast Club. We got a special guest in the building, Miss Desiree A.H. Did I say that right?
Good morning.
A.H. All right, Desiree A.H.
Good morning, Miss Desiree. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, and you?
All right.
We're here to talk about something serious today.
Yes, Desiree is from
Indeed.
knowyourgirls.org, right?
Yes. Breast cancer is something that I've had a journey with. So as a result of it, I am happy to be able to participate in trying to elevate the education and empowerment as it relates to breast health. Because I think that it's not talked about enough in our community. And it is very important that we know our breast health, know what our risk factors are, and feel encouraged to look into whatever needs to be done in order to ensure good health.
You know, I actually did this Sister Strut walk last year, and I met a lot of breast cancer survivors while I was doing that, and I got a lot of information. So why don't you share some of that information? And the Sister Strut is for African-American women, supporting African-American women, because we are affected differently.
That's
than
true.
Other women.
One of the things that's important to note is that, we tend to get diagnosed at a younger age. I personally was diagnosed at age 38, and it is a different journey than an older woman. And I think that, it's important for young women to know that they can and do get breast cancer. So it's important for you to know your girls.
Yes, because early detection is key in making sure that you can be a survivor.
And it's also important in order to be able to have more options in terms of treatment. I think that, oftentimes, fear is a factor. And so people don't like to necessarily go to the doctor. And it's important for you to have serious conversations about your family. Although only 5 to 10% of breast cancer is hereditary, I think it is important, because cancer is not considered to be sexy, that we actually know what our family health history is, as well as our mental health history, because those information can help guide you in terms of your lifestyle as you're coming up as a young person, because oftentimes we're predisposed to things that we don't even know until something happens. And I think that it's really important for us not to bury our heads in the sand, but to try and gather the information that is out there currently available to educate yourself. Because oftentimes I find that women don't know enough. We know pink ribbon, but we don't know about the risk factors. We don't know what to do. And so therefore the fear causes us to delay, which doesn't help us in the end. And oftentimes we are the glue in our families. And so many people rely on us, and we're often taught that we need to be caregivers and we need to be superwoman, but we're not really taught to take care of ourselves. And so self-care is an issue I find in our community as well, in terms of overall health.
How did you react when you found out you were diagnosed at 38? Because it didn't resurface too, like 10 years later, right?
8 years later. It's interesting. I didn't know, because when I was diagnosed, no one really talked about breast cancer in young women, so I didn't really think that it was going to be a thing. No one really said that African Americans, got breast cancer, so I didn't expect to be a statistic. So when it happened, I was like, okay, I need to educate myself, because clearly I'm not informed. And so would say I was surprised, because one of the things that I later learned in life, because everyone said to me, well, what about your mother? What about your sisters? Have they been diagnosed and touched by disease? And the answer was no. But no one ever asked me whether my father's side of the family had any history with breast cancer.
Because men can get breast cancer.
Men can get breast cancer as well. And so paternal relatives do increase your risk. So I think that had I known that, I could have taken a different posture in terms of, trying to follow up on certain aspects of health, even though my situation, I like to say, is a little different, because oftentimes women feel you have to have a lump. And that's the only way you will know that you have breast cancer. I didn't have a lump.
Really?
And so I had what is called calcifications And the only reason why that was detected was because my employer at the time offered on-site mammograms. So I thought it was a perk that I was taking advantage of.
See, I didn't know that that's how you ended up going to get, because I was wondering, was
How
there
did I
some
know
type
so
of
early?
signs?
Yeah, I was
Right.
going to ask that too, yeah.
Yeah,
They always say feel for a lump. Even when I go to the doctor, because
Right.
me and my wife, I feel for my wife's lump. Just
You
in case.
should.
You just fondling.
It's fondling too, but I'm also feeling for a lump. But I was wondering, I was like, damn, if what else is there? So you said, what was the reason that you said?
Well, I had calcifications.
Now, what is that?
Calcifications is when you have calcium deposits in your breast tissue. It's common. Many women have it but don't know. But when they do mammograms and they start seeing it change in shape and size, that's what's a red flag. And so because I had been going to have these mammograms through my employer, when they saw it changed, they then called me in and said, we need additional film. And then they later said to me, you need a biopsy. So that's how I was able to learn that I had breast cancer. But had I been looking only for a lump and not taking advantage of this offering,
There
I
would have
might
been no
not even
sign.
be here
So
today.
that's why it's important just to get random breast cancer.
But when did they tell you to get a mammogram? Because usually doctors say you don't even really need to get one until.
There's so much controversy around when you should. I think it's important for individuals to know what their risk factors are. I think it's also important that you advocate for yourself. When I got diagnosed as a young woman, I realized so many other people in my community might not know about this disease. So let me come and show and be a face so that people could actually understand that it's real. It's not over there. It's happening right here. And I have to say, sadly, several people that I started sharing with actually said, well, you know what, I'm going to go to the doctor and get some, just get checked out or start paying more attention to their breasts in terms of breast self-exams, going and having clinical exams, and several people did get diagnosed. And so one of the things that I would say as it relates to when and how, et cetera, because there's so much controversy on when you should go, it's important for you to know your body. It's important that you actually pay attention to the signs, not getting so caught up in life that you forget or ignore things that you have. Because I always like to say women of color tend to say, I'm all right. Unless their limb is hanging off, they say, I'm good. And so one of the things that is important to know as it relates to screenings, as it relates to young people specifically, the mammogram is a screening tool that we have. But unfortunately, young women tend to have dense breasts. And so the mammogram is not the ideal screening tool for that because it cannot see through the dense tissue. And so, one of the things that we have here in New York State is that if you are seen to have dense breasts, you need to be notified. And in addition to that, you also need to either have an ultrasound or an MRI done if there's suspicion that there could be stuff going on, because those are the only tools that they have currently that can actually see through dense tissue.
Why don't they
But
do
you
that
didn't
more,
even
though?
have a
Why don't they do
suspicion.
MRIs and ultrasounds more? It seems
It's
like
cost. And also it's exposure. Although we get exposure in the airplane and we love to travel, but you do get exposure to radiation, etc. With some of the other testing that is available. And so at the end of the day, it's a cost factor. And you don't really a lot of people get very nervous when they have to do a lot of different testing. And oftentimes, you go through a lot of testing and a lot of emotional angst, and there's really nothing going on. I just tell women that it's important to know what the risk factors are.
Right.
I tell women you don't have to have a lump, or you could have a lump in your armpit, and it still be breast cancer.
Now, how can they go through? How can they go through the MRI without necessarily? Because for me, it's always go to emergency. You go to emergency room, and the emergency room with MRI.
Yeah. They love that, right?
How do you do that? If you want to get it checked out, and you go for your mammogram, they don't feel anything, but you just feel like you have to. What's the next step? Emergency room.
One of the things is that it's not just you as an individual that you can say, oh, I want more testing, because I've met women that say, well, why can't I just get the MRI and not do the mammogram? But there's a standard of care, and the standard of care is having a mammogram. And so you have to go through the steps. And unless you have a doctor that's going to potentially advocate and say that there's a history, there's a suspicion, etc., then oftentimes people are left with expenses from a visit because they had a test. It's not going to be covered. And now you have a financial burden.
Right.
That's a whole other thing depending on, where you are in life and in your lifestyle, who wants to actually now go into debt for that experience.
What's your current status?
My current status is that I'm doing well. I like to tell people that it's been a journey, as you mentioned. I've had the disease twice. Anytime the disease comes back, it's more aggressive than it was the first time. And I've had a lot of side effects from treatment, but I've also had a lot of late effects. And one of the things that I often tell people is that we tend to be very visual. And so when you see people, unless they look like their arm is falling off, they're good. But oftentimes the damage is internal that no one ever sees. And so we just really need to be more in touch with the challenges that one can face from a diagnosis. But I'm thankful to still be here. I'm thankful to have the opportunity to come out and try to educate. I do educational programs throughout New York City to educate on breast and ovarian cancer through an organization, SHARE. I also actually facilitate 2 support groups in Harlem in order to educate as well as support women on the journey as well. And so I am trying to be out here and reach as many of my people as I can in order to encourage them.
You've spoken about risk factor a few times. Now, other than hereditary, what are some of the other risk factors that people should know about?
I always like to say that, we like to say black don't crack. And so oftentimes women don't even look their age. But age is actually a risk factor. As you get older, you're at an increased risk. So no matter how young you look, your body, your DNA is your DNA, and your body knows that it's aging.
You could be 20 in the face, but 50 in the heart. It's there.
And so the risk factor rises. It's also important to know your menstrual history. If you started your menses before the age of 12, or you go into menopause after the age of 55, that also increases your risk as well. If you've had a family history, i.e., your first degree relatives like your parents, your siblings, if they've been diagnosed, then that also increases your risk as well. If you've had a personal history of breast cancer, or if you've had benign breast diseases, your risk increases as well. There are 2 genes called BRCA1 and BRCA2, BRCA1 and 2. If you carry those gene mutations, you're at an increased risk for both breast cancer and ovarian cancer as well. And then, there's environmental risk factors that exist as well. We oftentimes don't really think about the environment other than, we're breathing air. But what's in the air is key as well.
What about your diet too?
Your diet does play a factor in it as well. I like to tell people that we should be eating more fruits and vegetables. We should definitely be drinking more water. I think it's also important to say obesity is a risk factor as well. The amount of alcohol you drink on a daily basis can increase your risk, and smoking can also increase your risk for many cancers, breast cancer as well. So I just think that if we start reading labels, many of us are predisposed to hypertension, cholesterol, etc. But reading labels make a difference in terms of what you consume. I have people tell me all the time, "Well, I don't eat red meat, and so I just eat fish," and they're thrilled about that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they don't even think about what waters their fish swim in. And if your waters are swimming in waters high in mercury, you're now getting that into your system as well. Whether your fish is farm raised or your fish is wild, you should be eating fish that's wild, not farm raised, because you don't know what they gave it. That's something that's important for people to think about as well. I think that we need to also not only be mindful of the food we eat, but we also need to be active. We need to have physical activity and not necessarily be just on the couch, because your especially for women, when you start to go through menopause, you start to gain weight. Because of the reduction of estrogen in your body. And, you often start to see women start to spread in the midsection. And that isn't a good thing either, because, they know that obesity can increase your risk. And so oftentimes I like to tell women, you can have a risk factor and never have the disease. You just don't know how many risk factors will tip you over the edge.
Right.
And so you want to always opt to have reduction in your risk factors, because some things we can't change, but certain things we can contribute to.
When it comes to the treatment and cures, what do you think about holistic medicine?
I think integrative medicine. I think is important. I personally, utilized acupuncture. During my treatment process, and, credit my acupuncturist to help me to be here through all the challenges. But one of the things that I think is important, again, as it relates to knowledge, you need to know who you're going to. There are a lot of people out there that utilize their services while people are emotional. And they're not necessarily thinking.
Right.
And so everyone wants to live. So we're going to take whatever first
I'll
train
try
is
anything.
coming.
Right.
And oftentimes, unfortunately, that's not the answer, because you don't know the quality of whatever it is that is being prescribed for you or given to you. One of the other things that's important to know, that herbs can actually cause contraindication with your chemotherapy. And so to take herbs while you're going through chemo and not tell your oncologist can actually harm you, because now what the chemo is supposed to be doing, it's not doing because of the herbs. So I just think that people need to be informed about what they're doing. They need to be open and be able to have communication with their doctor to say, I want to try integrative medicine along, and make sure that everybody has an understanding and is on board.
Right.
Because people do things in secret and think that it's okay.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if you're creating more problems for yourself, then what good is it at the end of the day?
What about marijuana?
Well, I have not had the good fortune to need it. Yeah, I know you got me. And I appreciate that. But, I do think that, depending on your circumstances, oftentimes, if you get to stage 4 disease and it's advanced, there can be challenges for you. Pain management becomes a thing. And so I have met, many people who have actually utilized it in order to help them with the pain management that they need to deal with. And so I think at the end of the day, whatever is going to keep you comfortable so that you can have a quality to life, you should explore. But everything is not for everybody. And so I think that at times, you do need to understand who you are as an individual and make sure that you are getting what you need, because what your girlfriend might have used may not be beneficial to you. And so it is a personal journey at the end of the day.
Well, we appreciate you for joining us and filling us in.
Thank
Where
you.
can they
People
find
reach
you?
Yes.
Yeah, how can they
right.
get more information if they need?
Well, I actually have a website, DesireeWalker.com, but I do work with Young Survival Coalition, having been diagnosed as a young woman. So they service women under the age of 40 that have been diagnosed. That's youngsurvival.org. And as I mentioned, I facilitate 2 support groups in Harlem at the County Cullen Library through the organization SHARE, which is sharecancersupport.org. But I do want to just acknowledge, that Komen and the Ad Council trying to come out and help to bring a highlight to this conversation is important, because one of the things that I think that often doesn't happen is the fact that we only want to talk about breast cancer in October, but it's a year-round thing that people are being diagnosed.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank
we
you.
Appreciate you.
All right,
Thank
then.
you.
Thank
Desiree
you. All the
A.H.
best.
It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.